I mean, this is just so embarrassing. He went from 5 minutes ago saying that the cost of tariffs are not passed on to the consumer, and now he's saying that they are, which is why Dean is laughing, because it's just so silly. He just immediately contradicted himself.
Okay, so if God commanded you to baby today, would you do it?
Yes.
Oh my God. What is this conversation?
Okay, so why would you baby, but you wouldn't a baby?
Because that would be cruel or something.
Wait, is baby not cruel? So how come not baby today, but not a baby?
I mean, this is kind of like a brilliant argument when you think about it. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, hit like, comment, subscribe. It really helps us out, and I appreciate everybody who does that. Nick Fuentes decided to debate this TikTok kid named Dean Withers, who's kind of blowing up right now. And I've only seen clips, and some of these clips have been amazing. So let's get into it.
Yes, like we're good. Okay, now let me do this, like this. Okay, that wasn't too hard.
All right.
All right.
Nick, let's get a little introduction. I would like you to give a little introduction and tell us, the new viewers and stuff, who you are, what you do, talk a little about yourself, and yeah, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, well, my name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. I'm a live streamer. I've been doing a show called America First for 8 years, almost 8 years now. I'm 26, from Chicago. I'm a reactionary Trump supporter. Well, I was a Trump supporter, not so much anymore, but I'll be defending Trump. That's fine from, debate point of view. And yeah, so that's me. So I'm excited to be here. It's gonna be good.
Sweet. Okay. Well, the first topic, as everyone knows, I told the chat as well, is who is the better presidential candidate? Dean, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, I think that the better presidential candidate is Kamala Harris. But I just wanted to clarify with Nick. You said that you're not much of a Trump supporter. So, are you voting for Trump?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to vote for him.
Okay.
Who are you voting for?
I'm not voting.
Oh, okay. Holy. Well, I mean, the reason I chose that topic was because, I thought that you were voting for Trump. I don't really see much use in it if you're not voting for Trump. I mean,
well, it's worthwhile because I'll argue that people should. I'll just argue that Trump is better than. I think that Trump would be a better president, but I'm not going to vote for him.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So we could argue that.
Yeah, I guess we'll start there. I disagree. And,
okay.
One of the main reasons why I disagree, we could come out of the gate swinging, is this economic policy. I think that, it's pretty clear, and we could probably both agree on this, that the average American should be doing better than they are today, and they should not be doing worse than they are today. Donald Trump's proposed economic policy will make the average American worse off with his tariffs, and then his...
It's just a plain fact going back all the way to the 80s, I believe, that every Republican president left the economy worse off than when they were first inaugurated. And every Democrat has stepped into office during a struggling economy and then turned it around by the end of their presidency. Every single time in modern history. This is just a fact. You can look at the numbers. You can look at unemployment, GDP, and inflation, stock market prices, whatever metric you want to use, deficit spending. There's a really good chance that it fits within that framework that I was saying.
TCJA for another 10 years disproportionately benefits rich people. It will also just add reckless spending to our debt. It will inflate it even more than it is today. I think there's an estimate from the CBO putting that right at $5.8 trillion. He has no plan how he's going to pay for it. Then we look over at Kamala Harris. Okay, her proposed tax policy so far is $2.4 trillion. She knows exactly how she's going to pay for it, and they're designed for 100 million American workers in the low and the middle class, and it's going to make them better off.
Avitus Ante? I did see that clip, yeah.
Donald Trump's going to make them worse off. Argument's clear.
Okay, that's it. It's just the economic proposals. That's all you got?
We could start there.
Okay.
Sure, we can reference other things too. I didn't want to just throw everything at you at once.
Sure.
We could talk about multiple things.
Yeah, well, let me address all that. I mean, so with regard to the tariffs, J.D. Vance pointed this out. The Biden administration continued many of the Trump-era tariffs. So that's kind of a moot point. I mean, I don't know if Kamala's going to. Oh, of course he did. Of course he continued.
No, they continued the tariffs,
China.
but it's not a moot point. I disagree with the Biden-Harris administration.
Moot point.
Because they continued the tariffs on China. But what Donald Trump is proposing today is a 10 to 20% flat tariff on all goods imported into the country, right? I could say that any and all tariffs are bad, right? But a 10 to 20% flat tariff on all goods is worse than tariffs on goods imported from China.
I don't think it's a flat tariff. Is that actually the policy? I don't believe that's right.
It is, right?
Absolutely, yes. Donald Trump's policy is a flat tariff on every a 10 to 20% tariff on every single import that comes into the country.
I think that J.D. Vance was talking about this last night at the debate. I think you could reference his own policy. He's talked about it multiple times in the past. If you don't think this is,
it's only on certain countries. There would be no 15. That doesn't make any sense. There'd be no 15 to 20% tariff. But even if that were the case.
It is
Let's say for the sake of argument that's true, because I don't know the Trump policy. They keep saying that Trump is going to put in place, they're calling it a consumption tax. A consumption tax is a value added tax. They're saying it's going to be like a sales tax. And that's the idea that the taxation occurs at the point of a sale of goods. And that's actually a real proposal, but that's different than a tariff because, and here's the difference. When you put a tariff on goods and services, to call that a consumption
So why does Trump call it a tariff?
tax is to
He's talking about taxing these like Chinese companies directly. As we found out from the David Pakman clip, that's not how tariffs work. So an American company will make some purchase from some Chinese company, and then when the product comes in, the American company is the one that's paying that tariff.
imply that the consumer will bear the full cost of the tariff. And that's not necessarily true. Trump had a lot of tariffs in his first term, and the price of goods did not significantly increase in spite of the tariffs. Everybody says that it would only be the case if the full cost of the tariff was passed down to the consumer, but that flies in the face of the fact that foreign corporations will bear the cost of the tariff, or almost all of it, and certainly not all of it is passed down to the consumer. So that's just not true. That's one. Two, with regard to deficit spending, tax policy, I mean, you know, I know you're a young guy and everything, but like Republicans and Democrats, there's a bipartisan consensus on spending. Let's just talk about spending. Most of the spending.
Hold on. How old is Nick Fuentes? Isn't he still in his 20s? He's 26 years old. Why is he calling somebody who's probably like 4 years his junior a young guy?
On an annual basis is not even discretionary. Okay, there's mandatory spending and there's discretionary spending. Mandatory spending means you can't change it. Okay, the executive doesn't change it, Congress can barely change it, and that is liabilities like Social Security, Medicare. It's baked into the cake. It's a vast majority of it. And who is going to cut entitlements? Nobody. Republicans aren't proposing to cut entitlements, although they'd be more willing to than Democrats. Democrats are certainly not touching entitlements. Biden always attacks Republicans in his State of the Union, saying they're trying to touch Social Security. What do you think's driving the deficit of the debt? It's Social Security and Medicare. It's unfunded liabilities. In terms of military spending,
Also, stupid tax policy like lowering taxes for wealthy corporations and individuals.
military spending has gone up every year under the Biden administration. It's like $850 billion per year. That's the largest item in the discretionary budget. So mandatory spending is going to go up in perpetuity under Democrats and Republicans. Discretionary spending is going
Blaze Fort, what's up, buddy?
to go up because military is by far and away the biggest component of that, and Biden spends more, and he spends more on military appropriations because of all the foreign aid. We gave $175 billion to Ukraine. We gave.
Did you see Pakman's comparison of Harris's lead in battleground states compared with Biden's in 2020? I felt a pit in my stomach.
Welcome to the show. Later on in the program, when we look at some viewer emails, I'm going to talk about some pretty consistent criticism that I'm receiving. Not unfair, but I would argue a little bit misplaced, that I'm not being optimistic enough about Kamala Harris's chances in November. You know, yesterday I was speaking here at the conference in Las Vegas with a bunch of other people, Sam Cedar, Farron Cousins, and others, about the polling situation and the indicators we have as to what's going to happen. And I want to outline for you what I see as the biggest red flag right now in the polling. Now, let me make
Okay. So first, what I want to do is I want to pull up the 2016 results, and then we're going to pull up the 2020 presidential election results. I want to look at Trump's ceiling, okay? And I want to compare it to the current polling, all right? Trump's ceiling in 2016 was 46.1%. Trump's ceiling in 2020 was 46.9%. So he improved about 0.8%. The reason why I think we're headed for a different kind of dynamic in 2024 is pretty simple. I've talked about it 1,000 times on the stream. Well, there's a few reasons. So the first reason I want to say is I don't think you're going to find too many quote unquote shy Trump voters in 2024. There's an argument that there was such a voter in 2016 and 2020. The dynamic has totally changed culturally. There's typically a lot of hostility and anger at the incumbent party for whatever problem is going on in the country, whether that be prices or people have foreign policy gripes or immigration, whatever. The second thing that I want to get into is Trump's ceiling was right around 47%. And yet the polls had him much lower in 2016 and 2020, maybe not much lower, but they were off by like 3 or 4 points in various states and nationally. There was a little bit of a discrepancy there. And what we're seeing in the current polling is right in line with his ceiling from 2016 and 2020. Like it's right around like 47%. And then you have this, the third thing being this trend since Dobbs of Democrats doing better than their polling for 2.5 years now. So I think it is pure cope to assume that there's going to be the same polling error in 2024 that there was in 2016 and 2020. There's no reason why you should just assume that that same error is going to happen. 2012, for example, underestimated Obama. People were expecting this really close race, and then it wasn't particularly close. So polling errors will go in Democrats' favor, polling errors will go in Republicans' favor, and it just kind of just goes back and forth and back and forth.
After this segment, I'm not going to do any more polling stuff today other than just responding to that email at the end of the show. Ultimately, I don't believe that how I talk about how the polling looks has any impact on the eventual results. I think fundamentally, this program is not big enough, and I'm mostly preaching to people who are already planning to vote for Kamala Harris that I don't see.
We shouldn't delude ourselves. Every metric that we can observe right now indicates that this is going to be a nauseatingly close race. A nauseatingly close race. I mean, the race is so close in all 7 swing states that a 2 or a 3 point error in one direction or another could be the difference between a Trump electoral college landslide and a Kamala electoral college landslide. It is really that close. You should also bear in mind that similarly to 2022, it is just plainly the case that Republican pollsters are flooding the aggregates. In fact, we actually have some numbers for how many have been flooded into the aggregate. And it's really something when you look at it. This is what they did in 2022. This is why a lot of pollsters predicted much more of a red wave in 2022. That didn't pan out. So when we look at partisan polls that are being thrown into these aggregates since September 30th, so that's last Monday, so about 10 days ago, 11 days ago, 12 days ago, there have been 26 Republican-aligned pollsters, 33 nonpartisan, and only 1 Democratic-aligned pollster. It's the same kind of flooding that they were doing in 2020. It's the exact same thing. So a lot of people are worried that this race is shaping up to be like 2016, and I'm saying it's shaping up to be more like 2022. And we all know how that went.
That the way I couch things would really impact results. And number 3, I don't think it makes any sense to say we should act more optimistic than the data say because what? Okay, so with that out of the way, here for me is the most concerning polling sign that I see in this race. Real Clear Politics, whatever you think of them, allows you to look not just at what does polling look like today, but what did polling look like for Biden-Trump on this same day in 2020, and what did polling look like for Clinton-Trump on this same day in 2016. And I hate to tell you, it doesn't look particularly good. Right now, Kamala Harris leads by 2 nationally. On this day in 2020, Biden led by 9, and on this day in 2016, Hillary Clinton led by almost 5.
And on this day in 2012, hold on. And on this day in 2012, Romney was leading by a full point. The final results were Obama +4. So yeah, don't assume the same polling error from 2016 and 2020. I understand that we're all like traumatized by 2016, and I get that. And it's not like I'm fully comfortable, okay? Like I wish that this race wasn't as close as it was, but it is. It's a close race. It just is. But would you rather be Trump or Kamala with this polling right now? I would rather be Kamala.
$27 billion to Israel, another $8 billion to Israel last week, $7 billion to Taiwan, $1.3 billion to Egypt. That's in addition to the $850 billion per year, which that's like the highest ever under Biden. So, spending's not coming down under anybody.
Well, that's just wrong.
Every Democratic president in the modern era has reduced the deficit. I'm not sure about the debt, the total debt. That's a separate metric. But every single president has reduced the deficit.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. You could
What's
reference
wrong? What's wrong about
that spending didn't go down under Biden and Harris compared to Trump. You could reference a committee.
I didn't
for
say
a
that. I didn't say
responsible
that.
Budget. You said that spending wasn't going down under anyone, right? We can make a comparative analysis between the two last terms, and we could show how it's gone down. A committee for a responsible federal budget indicated that Donald Trump signed $8.7 trillion of debt into law. Meanwhile, Biden and Harris only signed in 4.6. Break that down into COVID and non-COVID. Like for instance, Trump signed $4.8 trillion of non-COVID related expenditures into law. Meanwhile, Biden only signed in $2.2 trillion. But the first point that you made, I wanted to touch on that. You were talking about the tariffs. Right, you just kind of related it back to how like the Kamala Harris campaign is calling it, like a sales tax, and then that's kind of all you said. Yeah, I don't really care what they're calling fine. I agree. That's just a term that they use to convince the average American that doesn't know much about what a tariff is, that it's really bad. But at the end of the day, the impact of the tariff, right, still does serve as a detriment to the consumer. And you were very careful with your words here, because you told me that tax, right, that tariff isn't fully paid by the consumer, implicitly kind of conceding there that some of it is.
Dean Withers.
Right? And that's what I'm talking about. That is a tax that in some sorts is passed off to the consumer. We could also consider other attributes such as the idea.
Bro, he's 20 years old. This kid is 20 years old.
When we reduce the overall supply of a good with a constant demand, the price will go up. That's basic macroeconomics. That's going to happen when we reduce the imported the amount of imported goods without increasing the amount of.
I'll tell you what I was doing when I was 20. Okay, I was just trying to. My BFF Shotgun. Thank you so much for the gifted sub. That's all I thought. I was not thinking about my future. No, you know what? That's not true. You know what? I'm underselling it. Okay, I didn't go through my boy phase until I was kind of into my 20s. When I was 20, I was super into the Iraq War, learning about the conflict, studying history. You know, I was definitely, but I was not as well spoken as him at that time.
Like supply manufactured here at home in the US. At the end of the day, tariffs are bad. This is a unilateral, agreed upon consensus. Republicans and Democrats alike. You go to any economist, they'll tell you this, unless they don't have the necessary qualifications to be. And that's a fact. And then when we kind of consider these tariffs alongside his policy disproportionately benefiting the rich man and seemingly at the expense of the poor man with these tariffs, it becomes quite clear. If we want to serve to the average American in their best interests, we need to be voting for Kamala Harris because her policy does exactly that. I mean, 83% of the tax cuts in the TCJA.
Giving me money.
Not at all. 83% of the tax cuts in the TCJA for the last 7 years went to the top 1%. I mean, is that just rhetoric?
Okay, so my turn?
You go for it, sir.
Okay, so with regard to tariffs, yes, some of the cost is passed down to the consumer, but it's marginal. And the point of tariffs is to reshore manufacturing. I'll give you a perfect example. China has now become the largest manufacturer of electric cars. Huge industry. You could buy an electric car in China for $10,000. Tesla does not cost $10,000. If we allow China to dump their electric cars in America, there goes Tesla. There goes our American electric car manufacturing. It's a national security problem. There's a lot of problems. You have to put tariffs on the cars. Probably China will send them here regardless because they're still so cheap. And yeah, they're not going to be $10,000, but there's a value in making cars in America. There's a value, and by the way, because then Americans get those jobs. So, you know, you could say that free trade creates the lowest costs, but the only reason it creates the lowest costs is because they can undercut us with wages and with their lower standard of living and monetary policy that they have in their own country. So tariffs are essential for a holistic understanding of the economy. The increase in prices is marginal. It's not significant. And when you call it a consumer tax or a sales tax, you know, that does matter because they're conflating that with a VAT tax. That's very different. The 15, 20% to the, and I don't know that they're doing it on every country, so I'll take your word for it.
They are.
It's not going to be passed down to consumers beyond a marginal amount.
It will.
That's one. In terms of, you said, oh, well, Trump had more deficit spending.
He did.
Almost all of that is accounted for by the pandemic. No. Almost all of them. You say, well, the Trump had a $8 trillion deficit. That was because of the.
No, he blew up the deficit before the. I mean, look, there was deficit spending because of the COVID epidemic, and that's, you know, you can't blame Trump for that. But he had already exploded the deficit well before the pandemic.
COVID stimulus, the PPP, the cash payments.
Half of it.
Almost all of it. And here's the point.
Go to CRBF.org.
Hang on.
He's just wrong. Nick is just wrong here. Anybody who's watching this right now, or if it's a YouTube video in the comments, you know, just look up the numbers.
Yeah, I'll let you finish.
You'll see the deficit just shoots like straight down after the tax cuts.
Yes, sir.
You said so. The structure
didn't it take until maybe 2020 or 2019 or 2018 until that actually happened, because it took a second for the tax cuts to go into effect?
Structural problems with deficit spending, they're there under Trump, they're there under Harris. And by the way, Republicans tried to get limitations on the deficit. That's what they got elected on. Republicans regained control of Congress in 22, saying they'd limit the deficit. They negotiated it over the debt ceiling negotiations last year. They negotiated it over military appropriations last year with the October 1st deadline. Tried to negotiate.
Biden had already taken steps to reduce the deficit before the new Congress came into being or whatever in 2023. Statista. This is the reduction of the deficit on Biden's watch right here. It trended a little bit down going into 2024 here, but from the time he started, this is where he ended up here. And this was before Republicans took office. So this is just completely dishonest framing.
Negotiated this year, Democrats wouldn't come to the table on deficit reduction. Either way, like the deficit is baked into the cake, okay? The debt is $30 trillion. Interest rates are high. Interest to service the debt is going up. Neither Harris or Trump is meaningfully
Are interest rates still high? Aren't they kind of like Midland right now?
going to reduce the debt or the deficit. So it's just moot. Without bringing down Social Security and Medicare, just forget about it. Without bringing down the military, it's not going to happen. You know, and there are these extraordinary measures like COVID and Ukraine war. It's really neither here nor there. Also, I mean, I think deficit is really besides the point. If you want to get further into
First
the
time
deficit,
I've heard a
though,
Republican say that, by the way.
yeah, well, I'm not a normal Republican. I'm not like a fiscal conservative. Okay,
Well, that's
look,
true.
Do you mind if I
the
respond to the points that you've made so
deficit.
far?
What's that?
Do you mind if I respond to the points that you've made so far?
Yeah,
I just
go
wanna
ahead.
lose track of what you said.
Sure.
So, like, first of all, you
Wait,
said
wait,
that
real
you-
quick, Dean, I'm not cutting you off. Guys, we just have 10 minutes on this topic. Just 10 more minutes on this topic. Go ahead, Dean.
Okay.
Okay, right. So the first claim that you made, that tariff isn't passed off to the consumer, yeah, that's wrong, because what would the point of the tariff be then? Okay, we see an increase in domestic production given tariffs because that is passed off to the consumer. Would you agree there?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so
The
then why
point-
do we
the
see an
point of the
increase in domestic
tariff-
production given tariffs?
Because when you produce something in China, you can make it for cheaper, so your margin is bigger, so you can undercut
But you make
prices.
it more expensive for the consumer at the grocery store by imposing those tariffs, right? And then
Not
secondly, I
necessarily.
agree with you.
Again,
Okay.
because the China will pay the tariff to get their goods to the market because they
But then-
need.
But that's not who pays the tariff, though. China doesn't pay the tariff. It's American companies that pay the tariff.
access to the
buy
market.
it? But then why won't we buy it? Because it costs more money, right? And that's
Yeah,
my whole
well, we're-
argument is that tariffs cause the end consumer to pay more at the grocery store, to pay more at Best Buy, to pay more at the car dealership.
Do you know
But
what a
there's
tariff
another point
is?
that you brought up there. It's a tax on an import. And there's another point that you brought up there about how we want to like spur domestic production of goods. I don't disagree. I absolutely agree. We should have a more industrialized economy where we produce goods here at home in America. We just disagree on how we get there, right?
How do we get there
support-
without tariffs?
Yeah, sure. Right, by driving further competition through the natural market. We do that via investment.
What's
we do
the
that by
natural market?
We do that by investing in money. Investing in money. That was crazy. Investing in the U.S. producers of goods, like the Chips and Science Act under Biden and Harris's administration, that invested billions of dollars into U.S. chip producers to further drive competition, right, with those imported goods, just via innovation in the product, right? And the fact that you, as a conservative, are sitting here telling me that we need a government to impose a regulation on the free market by tariffing those goods that are being imported to our country, is
Yeah.
just new. You know what I mean? Right?
Well, it
And
may be new to you because like your only context of Republican is like Reagan. But if you go back to Henry Clay and Friedrich List and the American system, Alexander Hamilton, the country was basically funded by tariffs until we had an income tax.
Yeah, do you know
Okay,
why?
we only had an income tax 100 years ago. Before that,
Dean was getting most of his answers from his friend over Discord, by the way. Wait, where's the evidence of that?
the federal government made its money from tariffs.
Yeah,
and by
but
the
you
way,
know
it's
why?
basic mercantilism because we want to make the stuff. And by the way, when you say, well, we're just going to invest, it doesn't work. China's dollar goes three.
What? So somebody had a problem with me bringing up the deficit here. Hold on a second. You said you wanted me to go back 10 years. So we can do that. So Obama took office and then we did the bailouts and then there were stimulus during the height of the financial crisis. And then the deficit just steadily went down on his watch. When Trump took office, it immediately started going up. It blew up not just because of COVID spending, but also because of his tax breaks. You can see that right here. And then on Joe Biden's watch, the deficit went down. It's just for the case for every single modern president, for every single modern Democrat, they came into office when there was a deficit, and every single Democrat on their watch reduced that deficit. That's just a fact.
3 times as far because the standard of living is lower. They're rich in raw materials. They have an endless supply of labor, cheap labor. The idea you're going to chips and sciences your way out of China having systemic advantages, economic factors of production like labor. They have 1.5 billion people. You're not going to pass a bill that's going to change those fundamental imbalances in the economy. We
Then
have
how about we meet
capital,
in the
we
middle?
have tech, we
Then
have
how about we meet in the
entrepreneurship,
middle?
they have labor. Okay,
how about
it's
we
the
meet in the
same
middle?
reason. Hang on, and it's the same reason why we're even when we try to they call it friend shoring. We're going to take our factories from China and give them to our allies like Philippines. It's still going to China because they have all the cheap labor. You just can't compete with that. You can't compete with the fact that they make everything, they have all the people. So you agree that we should reindustrialize. You literally cannot do that unless you protect industry. And by the way, China has tariffs too. All countries have tariffs. We're the country that doesn't have tariffs. They're eating our lunch as a result. So, that's just not true. What you're saying isn't true.
No, Donald Trump's taken away the average American.
When he says they're eating our lunch, it looks like their GDP growth has been trending downwards since like 2010.
Americans' lunch as a result. Like, once again, we've already
I'm just not qualified to talk about China's economy, to be honest with you.
already went over how tariffs can cause prices at the grocery store to go higher. Every single time we've historically increased tariffs on China, what have we seen? A reduction in U.S. agricultural exports. What did Trump have to do when he imposed his tariffs on China? He had to bail out American farmers with $28 billion. You say you want American industrialization. You say you want more U.S. production of goods. But then you also say that you want these tariffs on China to absolutely destroy American farmers. And you want the average American to be worse off, meaning they have less economic mobility to go and start a business in the first place. This is why
Republicans don't understand when Chinese makers give you an invoice for good, they simply add the tariff to the cost. We pay more, consumers pay more. Pakman was saying that it's actually the American companies that pay the tariff. So like if you put a tariff on like Chinese steel, and then there's an American company that wants to buy steel from China for some various infrastructure projects or whatever, China doesn't pay that tariff. Once that import comes into the country, it's actually the American company who's buying that steel who pays the tariff, and then they pass that cost off to the consumer.
Kamala Harris's tax policy is better, right? Because
This
what
is
we're
like
not going to
Democrat talking points.
do. Okay, well, can you dispute them?
Yeah, like I said, tariffs, the other country will pay the cost of the tariff. Okay, you're saying
He's just wrong about this.
consumers will pay it, and that's just wrong. Okay.
It seems like both of it seems like Dean doesn't know that that's what happens with tariffs either.
Okay.
So you
Under
don't
the
think that
Trump
tariffs
administration,
drive
hang
up
on.
the price of
Trump
goods?
administration, I'll give you a perfect example. Trump administration implemented tariffs against Canada, against Europe, against China. Inflation was low. Oh, hang on. Inflation was like 1.3% under Trump. Okay. So
During the last, if we're talking about cumulative, and if you count the last year of Trump's presidency, crediting him for low inflation is insane. We had negative oil prices at one point because the demand for oil was so low. Are we crediting Trump with that?
what you're saying is true, that the cost of the tariff would be passed down to the consumer 1-to-1 or even significantly. Inflation would not remain at or around 1%. Why? If and by the way, Biden administration has tariffs too. Inflation is very high, but the cost of goods going up.
It's not. It's 2.4% right now. That is not. That is low inflation.
Has everything to do with fuel prices going up.
Hey guys, we got 5 more
because of the war
minutes.
in
And I feel like Nick knows this too. It's just bullshit.
Ukraine.
Hey,
That has
5 more minutes.
Everything to do
5 more
with
minutes, Nick.
Okay.
Well, a very
Got it.
crucial point.
with the quantitative easing.
If they don't cause inflation of the pricing of goods at the grocery store, then why would we see an increase in domestic production?
Because it will make it competitive for America to make the same things.
How?
If
How? Yeah.
China, because it's basic math. If it
Explain it to
costs I'm going to, if you stop interrupting me. If it costs less to make something in China because they have abundant labor than it does in the United States, then China can sell it at a lower price because their cost is lower. But if we make them pay more to bring their goods to the market, then they have to sell it for more. Or
Wait, hang on a second. Nick Fuentes, not 2 minutes ago, was making the case that the cost of tariffs are not passed on to consumers. I mean, he's just wrong about how tariffs are paid, but he just said like literally 2 minutes ago that the cost is not passed down to consumers. Now he's saying it is. He's saying that the reason you do tariffs is to allow for American labor and American products to be more competitive in the American market because you can sell it for less because the tariffs are charged more. The tariffed products are charged more.
they have to pay the tariff and they make
Nick,
less profit.
Nick,
and that
you
makes
just
it
agreed with me.
profitable for
If they
Americans
have-
to make.
if
Can you
Chinese
stop
profit-
interrupting me? Can you
If
hang
Chinese
on.
products cost more,
Can
what
you
does
stop
that
interrupting
mean
me,
for the
please?
consumer? Sure.
It adds, but who pays the cost? China pays the cost to bring it to the
Sacco. So the rate of inflation right now in the US is 2.4%. That means on average, the cost of all goods and services are going up 2.4% year over year. That is a low level of inflation. They just announced these numbers. Was it yesterday or the day before? So when you say just because it's 2.4, what does that mean? What that means is that the costs of goods and services year over year, on average right now, are going up 2.4%. 2.4 isn't low, is it? I thought that was a little over the general ideal goal. The ideal goal is 2%, but 2.4% is still low. That's still healthy.
The market, not
so 2% over 2.4% over last year. Currently, the rate of inflation at the current pace, yes, is 2.4%. That is a low. That's a normal, healthy level of inflation.
not the consumer.
And who pays the cost once it's in the market?
Well, the consumer does.
Thank you.
But they're buying. But they're buying what they're already buying. They're just buying it from an American
Okay, so Nick Fuentes just immediately contradicted himself.
producer.
Yeah, for a higher price, right?
Yeah, so for a slightly marginally higher price, so we can have American production.
Okay. Yes,
But there's also economies of scale.
Thank you.
It stimulates American industry, and then America's able to produce what China would ordinarily produce.
Okay.
I mean, this is just so embarrassing. So I feel like we can just confidently say that Nick Fuentes is just lying his ass off and just trying to bullshit his way through the conversation with whatever talking points he thinks will be convincing, because he went from 5 minutes ago saying that the cost of tariffs are not passed on to the consumer, and now he's saying that they are. And he did it just so seamlessly, which is why Dean is laughing, because it's just so silly. He just immediately contradicted himself.
All right, in America, we'll produce it for a more expensive price because we don't have as cheap of labor as
It protects the American industry, which
by
is
causing
undercut.
Inflation, right? Can you agree with me there?
Marginal. It's marginal.
Marginal increases.
But either way,
we're getting somewhere.
But it's really neither here. Well, and I said that earlier, so it's the same thing. But either way, the Biden administration has
he said that the costs are just not passed to the consumer.
Tariffs too.
That's what
so
he
it's
said.
basically a moot point.
No, it's not a moot point because once again, he wants to impose tariffs on all.
But you disagree with the Biden administration's policy, right?
Absolutely, right. I do
Okay,
disagree
so
with tariffs.
what do we even argue about?
110%.
Trump had tariffs. Biden has tariffs. Tariffs.
Didn't he talk about doing like 1,000% tariffs on China? Am I remembering this right? I swear to God, it was something crazy like 1,000%. Trump promises to impose whatever tariffs are required on imported cars. So I said, China is currently building gigantic auto plants in Mexico, and they think they're going to sell all these cars into the United States, which would destroy Michigan, totally destroy your state. But it's not going to happen, not even close. They might as well stop building the damn plants. I will impose whatever tariffs are required, 100%, 200%, 1,000%. You're not going to sell any cars in the United States with those plants.
Protect industry in America. You support that.
No, so the reason the reason that this is a bad argument is because Trump wants more tariffs, right? I don't understand how this isn't evidently clear. I think what you're trying to do is kind of confuse people between me saying that tariffs that Biden and Harris imposed were bad, and me saying that when Donald Trump is elected, he wants to impose all tariffs on all imported goods. Right? One is just not true. Than another. Okay, so
they're not putting tariffs on all imported goods.
That's literally Trump's stated policy.
Okay, does he just want to keep the ones on China?
It's going to be on, I don't know the Trump policy, but it's not on all imported goods. That's
okay, so then how is he going to pay for the $4.8 trillion associated
with
You can
fact check that.
You can. You should.
Going to pay for
borrowing, like they pay for all that, like how they pay for $175 billion to.
And what's the biggest expense of our government?
Liabilities.
Medicare and Social Security.
Medicare, Social Security. That's totally wrong.
No, the biggest expense of our federal government is interest on debt.
Is that true? 2023 federal budget. I think this kid is wrong. Pretty sure this kid is wrong. The highest chunk is Social Security, then Medicare, then net interest. This was in 2023. So this is the 2024 budget. So unless something has drastically changed that I'm unaware of, maybe he means the difference between like discretionary and not. I don't know what he means. Yeah, I think
totally wrong.
Okay, I don't think that's wrong.
It's liabilities.
Totally correct.
Okay, we're wrapping up on time here. We'll give a.
Well, you're wrong on the Trump policy and you're wrong on spending.
Okay, we'll give a 1 minute closing to Dean started.
He's not wrong on the policy. He is he is wrong on the spending. He's not wrong on Trump's policy. Trump's policy is absolutely to do universal tariffs on all imports coming into the country.
we'll a 1 minute closing for Dean and then 1 minute for Nick.
Oh, you could go first, Nick.
Who gave the first opening statement? You or me?
It was Dean who started first.
Yeah, so Dean, we let Nick finish.
That means I go last.
Dean, you start.
And then Dean, the next one, Nick will start.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's fine. I was just looking first, so I should justify what I said there. So yeah, my closing statement would just be, all right, obviously I think that economic policy is a very prime reason to vote for Kamala Harris because she's going to make the average American better off. Donald Trump is not going to make the average American the better off. He's going to make them worse off with his tariffs. Right. Nick essentially did concede there, saying that tariffs do cause higher prices for the consumers at the grocery store. And then Nick also just kind of says that he doesn't really care about debt. Okay. So if you want more debt, vote for Donald Trump because he's going to throw $5.8 trillion on our nation's debt. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's proposed tax policy is going to be self-sufficient over the 10-year lifespan of the bill. And then one other final point here, there's much more reasons why Kamala Harris is a better candidate than...
I just heard about this Dean guy last week. I heard he has a philosophy degree. Gotcha. He's sharp. He's definitely smart. You got a little fact wrong at the end there, but yeah.
...than Donald Trump that we didn't get a touch on, such as the fact that we probably shouldn't be voting for a religious prosecutor. We should probably be voting for the individual that wants to enshrine federal protections for all 170 million American women and girls' right to choose, right? And plenty of other reasons that we didn't get to, and I'm sad that we didn't, and hopefully we might be able to get back around to it later, but I'll go and get to you the rest of my time. Take it away.
Yeah, all right. Well, Adin and Sneako, could we do immigration? I feel like that's a big one. We could do a few of these other issues.
Real quick,
it's a big issue.
Can you just do your statement really quick?
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, can we make that one of the topics?
Well, that's something that we had to talk about prior. Dean, if you would like to as well, we could do that next.
Can you repeat that? I was a little bit...
He wants to talk about immigration if you want to keep Trump or Kamala going. We have other subjects, but on the subject of Trump and Kamala...
You guys didn't agree to that prior, but if you guys want to agree to do an immigration, we can do that next. It's up to you guys. Both of you have to agree.
Yeah, you just want to see... I mean, like, maybe we could throw it in there at the end. I mean, get through the 4 topics we have agreed upon.
Sure.
And if there's time, we might be able to talk about it.
Okay. So please give your closing statement, Nick.
Yeah, so, I mean, my closing statement on Trump, I don't even think fiscal policy is the biggest issue. To me, that's really a side issue. And the reason is because both parties are profligate spenders. Republicans, Democrats are both profligate spenders. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, they're all huge spenders. They're huge spenders on the military. They're not touching liabilities. You know,
he's not wrong, but if you want to reduce the deficit historically, you should probably elect Democrats.
Talk about tax cuts, increasing the deficit. You can look at the Laffer curve and, debate whether that's really the case. I mean, the theory behind tax cuts is that it stimulates economic growth, which it certainly does. It brings in more tax revenue. Maybe you find that convincing. Maybe you don't. The point is, neither party's going to rein in the deficit. I just don't think it's an issue. In terms of tariffs, the
one party attempts to lower the deficit every time, and it's Democrats.
Consensus has changed. Democrats and Republicans used to be free traders. They're not anymore. Bill Clinton.
The plan for Trump in 2017 was to cut spending by getting rid of the ACA. And then that way you could sort of partly justify doing a tax cut because you no longer need those revenues. But they failed at that, and then they just did the tax cuts anyways, and it exploded the deficit.
Bush, Obama were free traders. They're just not anymore.
We gave up, what was it, $2 trillion in tax revenue over 10 years? Was that what it was?
Trump is not a free trader. Biden's not a free trader. Trump has tariffs. Biden has tariffs. And that's because there's a recognition that we need to have a supply chain in America. 85% of the economy in America is services. Only 15% is construction, agriculture, and manufacturing. And this is it's not only a national security issue, but it's also a jobs issue. We need to make stuff in America. The only way that we're going to beat these other countries that are undercutting us with wages is with tariffs to protect our industries. And yes, that does result in technically marginally higher consumer prices, but it's more important to have good jobs in industry.
All right, that was good. So we'll circle back to Trump and Kamala, but to keep it on the subject, we have 4 very different topics right now.
Real quick, before, I just want to say thank you both for giving you guys, you guys are letting each other talk and stuff. Thank you. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Sneako. I'm sorry to cut you off.
All right, so the next subject that we agreed upon was Christianity, but to make it interesting, Nick, we can be more specific. We could talk about Christian nationalism.
Sure.
Oh boy.
Okay, so the subject will be, is Christian nationalism good or bad? And
okay.
Well, let's start with Nick because we started with Dean last time. But we'll do let's do 3-minute intro. I'll give you a 1-minute warning, and then I'll give Dean a 3-minute intro, and then we'll go free flowing. And if it's interruptions, we'll time it. But
wait, do Catholics and like Lutherans and Protestants and evangelicals even do they all get along? if you're going to do Christian nationalism, like, isn't Catholic like the smallest group of those? How would you even do Christian? Isn't Nick's a Catholic, right? Maybe they'll get into the specifics here.
But I think it was good so far. But Nick, take the floor. 3 minutes.
Well, okay. I'm talking about the U.S.
Okay. Well, I believe that America should have a religious government. We should have a Christian Catholic government.
You didn't like that.
And, you know, we have to face the fact that liberalism has failed. And the best example that liberalism is failing is that we're not having enough kids. The society, the civilization that doesn't have kids will cease to exist, and it will lose, and it is losing. Liberalism around the world is receding, and these more ancient, tribal, perennial cultures are thriving. Islam is the fastest growing religion. China is on the rise. Tribalism, racialism, all these things, all these revanchist, historic ideologies are on the rise, and they're all beating back liberalism because liberalism is weak. It is ineffectual. It's causing all kinds of perversity, degeneracy. People are not having kids. It's just sort of like anti-human and inimical to the human body. So, I mean, in addition to Catholicism and Christianity being true, liberalism is clearly bankrupt.
The U.S., China, Germany, Japan, and India are some of the top economies in the world. Top 25 economies in the world. United States, China, Germany, Japan, India, United Kingdom, France, Brazil, Italy, and Canada. The top 10 is just dominated by liberal democracies.
Liberalism is clearly having a hard time. I think we should replace our state religion of liberalism with the state religion of Christianity. And I'm interested to see where Dean wants to take it, because obviously it's a huge topic. But I
don't know if these guys are just trolling or if they think that Christian nationalism could ever happen in this country. There would be so much opposition to that. It is impossible for me to conceive of a situation where something like Christian nationalism could be successful in America.
I think we should have a Catholic country, not a liberal atheist one.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot.
We're not a liberal atheist democracy. We're a liberal secular democracy, which means that you can practice whatever religion you want.
A lot of different ways that a conversation about Christian nationalism can go. I mean, I've debated people on Christian nationalism before that will concede even if Christianity's false, right? We should still be, a country that upholds Christian nationalism because it promotes better outcomes. But I think there's a couple points there that you made. I'd just like to respond to
better outcomes for whom?
Declining birth rates, immigration. That's crazy.
I'm Jewish. Do these guys want me to? I don't know. I mean, I feel like, what do they call it? God, there's a word for like sending people back to their own countries. What's it called? De-immigration or re-immigration? Some people take it to that extent where they talk about like, yeah, we need to like ship people out of here. Well, no, we're not talking about deportation. We're talking like they try to sanitize it. And so I think they call it re-immigration. Yeah. Or re-migration maybe?
Crazy. Then about, a couple
remigration, which is good. You think it would be good to like, who specifically should we remigrate and what would that look like?
Well, the other points that you brought up, I particularly think that Christian nationalism is bad because it doesn't allow us to effectively legislate.
Like even, what's his name? Richard Spencer, I think he stopped short of remigration and he was more in favor of just like segregation. So you don't necessarily kick people out, but you give people like their own little pocket of the country and they're just there. Yeah.
Given like the Christian religion, right, we are led to believe that particular things are wrong because God said so. You said that you're a Catholic. I think in the Catholic faith, you'll kind of have a different range on how bad things are. Something can be.
Weren't Catholics super persecuted when they first came to America? Am I crazy? For centuries, the U.S. discriminated against Catholics, the land of immigrants, enshrined freedom of religion in the Constitution, yet spent much of its history despising, harassing, and marginalizing Catholics.
A mortal sin, a venial sin, but something that I'd say here that is a very absurd conclusion given Christian nationalism. Blasphemy. So like blasphemy as defined by the Bible is the worst sin that anyone can commit. Does that mean that people should go to jail for life for blasphemy? Well, I don't know, because we know that people should go to jail for life for murder, and if blasphemy is worse than murder, and we're operating under a system in a society with a government that legislates on the basis of the Bible and these foundational beliefs as prescribed by Christianity, are we going to start sending people to jail for blasphemy too? I don't see how you'd be able to respond to that. I don't. And then like a couple other things that we could say here. The Bible promotes very harmful, bad beliefs. I mean, 1 Samuel 15:3, God tells Saul and his men to divide the Amalekite men, women, and girls. I bet if I was to engage in a conversation with this guy specifically about 1 Samuel 15:3, he'll end up saying that sometimes genocide's okay. Leviticus 25 verses 44 through 46. God tells the Israelites that they can own the non-Israelites as human property for life. I bet if I was to have a conversation with this guy about that topic, he'd end up saying that no, slavery hasn't always been wrong, alongside other things, right? So we could talk about how Christianity is false. We could talk about how it doesn't allow us to effectively legislate. We could talk about the absurdities that are already present.
So there's this concept in the Bible called, is it called Mosaic law? Is that what it's called? So these were laws that were given to man through Moses. And there's all kinds of like really wacky rules and laws in the Old Testament. And one of the important features of like Jesus Christ, for example, was that he came to earth and fulfilled Mosaic law by the time he was crucified. I don't really understand the logic of this, but yeah, the idea was like you didn't need to worry about Mosaic law after Jesus. You only had to worry about the 10 Commandments
in the Bible. But one last point that I'd like to bring up is if you're going to make an argument on the basis of the efficacy and the outcomes in which it would generate in society, which seemingly you started to there, well, what if we find another religion that generates better outcomes than the one that you hold to?
1 minute.
Okay, so the reason that you want a Christian nation is because it will promote human well-being and happiness. People are going to be having more kids and following these commandments. They'll be doing good. No degeneracy, none of that. Well, what if I told you that the
rules from the Old Testament made sense for the culture and time period, but in today's age, there are significant differences that people shouldn't base policies off of? That's true. Like you can find a lot of like really bizarre sounding laws in the Old Testament, but then when you read about like historian interpretation of these laws, there's like some kind of a cultural context that was relevant at the time. It's actually kind of fascinating.
The LDS church had even better outcomes than the Catholic Church. Would you all of a sudden be in support of an LDS-led state? Probably not. Okay, right? So that's another contradiction on its own. So feel free to kind of pick and choose there, respond to the point that you want, take it away.
So you said about birth rates, or
like what's up with the opposition to like pork in the Old Testament? Like could you find like a real world explanation for that? So like maybe pigs were spreading disease and bacteria more than other animals at the time or something like that? Maybe more people were getting sick, and so that's it. Like it kind of came from something like that. Is that literally that's what that was? I guess that makes sense.
Immigration. Well, here's the problem. Okay, one, the people that have liberalism are themselves. Okay, so the people that invented liberalism, that live in liberal societies, literally and figuratively are themselves. They're dying.
The guy that you worship.
Okay, are you going to interrupt me like 30 seconds into my rebuttal? That's crazy.
Let's
confidence in liberalism.
It's been good.
They desperate despair. They're addicted to drugs, all kinds of things. They're all over there. Okay, we're dying in America, we're dying in Europe. And by the way, these people come from
Jesus. There's a lot of censoring of curse words. I have no idea what he's saying half the time here.
Non-liberal or illiberal societies, and then their birth rate goes down. So even if you wanted to argue, oh well, like we could salvage liberalism with an endless supply of immigration from illiberal societies that have kids, when they get here, their birth rate goes down. And these are not liberal people. They come from illiberal places.
Top left guy is a Jew, by the way. Make it make sense. Wait, who? Adin or Dean Withers?
This is like China or Africa or Latin America. They come here, they assimilate.
Adin Ross is Jewish? Is he practicing Jewish or is he ethnically Jewish?
And within a few generations, the birth rate goes down because liberalism is. With regard to the question about efficacy and outcomes, I'm not arguing that we should have the religion with the best efficacy. I said liberalism has failed, and we know it's failed because it's committing suicide. So clearly liberalism as a system is...
I just think that we need... I feel like if you're only using birth rate to make this point, it just seems kind of silly to me. Because there's so many other markers. You need to look at like infant mortality. You need to look at like literacy rates over the years. You need to look at the percentage of people living in extreme poverty, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And by these metrics, when you combine these and others, liberal democracy has been a huge success, especially in the 21st century. Just an enormous success. It's true that it's being challenged right now. There's a sort of rising tide of authoritarianism that we have to contend with all over the country in South America and Eastern Europe and Asia. It's being tested for sure. It's not the first time it's been tested, but liberal democracy by so many metrics has just been such an amazing boon to the to the world, not just to this country.
Is not working. And that's why, it's such a radical notion. People think that we would have blasphemy laws or religious laws. They think it's a radical notion. It's unthinkable. Well,
his question was specifically, would you throw people in jail for committing heresy? DeBiz says, I took an advanced biblical studies in cultural history context course in college, and the main going theory we were taught was a lot of these laws, prohibitions, and even things like circumcision was specifically put in place as a way to promote an us versus them tribalism that helped survival in pre-industrial society. I'd be interested in going more detail about that. That's actually quite fascinating to me. I do know that the earliest known instance of circumcision being used in some culture, I looked this up one time, and it was Egypt, like 3,000 years ago. And there was no, the reason is going to blow your mind. It was considered a rite of passage for a young man to go through circumcision at an age of I don't know what it was at the time, maybe sometime between 12 and 16. And it was meant to indicate that you were ready for war should war come. It was meant to be a test of pain for young men. And if they could go through that experience and then endure that pain, then they were ready to become warriors. There was no other, that's the earliest known instance. In the research that I did, because I am not a fan of circumcision, I want my foreskin back. But in the research that I did 5 or 10 years ago, that's what it was. Hold on, let me just double check that. In ancient Egypt, the rite has been dated to at least as early as 6,000 BCE in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian mummies, which have been dated as early as 4,000 BC, show evidence of having undergone the rite. Wait, you can tell if a mummy has been circumcised? Are they not just dust at that point? At the mastaba of Ankara and Saqqara, an engraved wall provides an account of Uha dated to 23rd century BCE, which indicates that he and others underwent the rite. 6th dynasty tomb artwork in Egypt has been thought to be the oldest documentary evidence of the rite. The rite was performed by priests in a public ceremony using a stone blade. It is thought to have been more popular among the upper echelons of the society, although it was not universal, and those lower down the social order are known to have had the procedure done. On the other hand, medical historian Friedrich Hodges argues that there is evidence against the purported prevalence of circumcision in Egypt, proposing it was limited to priests. According to studies, the Egyptian rite performed at the age of puberty did not involve the amputation of an annular piece of the foreskin as the modern Jewish rite of Brit Milah. Instead, it would have involved excising a triangular section, or alternately just creating a longitudinal incision in the dorsal face of the foreskin. And again, I think the reason was just it was just like a pain ritual. David Gallagher claimed the rite in ancient Egypt to be a mark of passage from childhood to adulthood. He mentions that the alteration of the body and ritual were supposed to give access to ancient mysteries reserved solely for the initiated. The content of these mysteries are unclear, but are likely to be myths, prayers, and incantations central to the Egyptian religion.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
Dude, imagine doing this you gotta go in public.
Please don't do that.
You gotta go in public, in your community, pull your pants down, you got your wiener flopping about, and then some old priest comes at you with a stone blade and just arbitrarily cuts a chunk out of your wiener in front of all of your friends and family. I would have been like, no. You would have had to have knocked me out. I would have just said, no, I don't know. Anyways, there's different reasons why different historians say that it happened. Some people say that it promoted cleanliness or whatever, and then others claim that it was a rite of passage for young men. But yeah, 6,000 to 3,000 years ago is the earliest instance of people practicing this ritual.
System must be replaced. It's an imperative. It's not a question of, whether or how or anything like that. It's simply...
Would you do it if you got a superpower? If it turned me into Superman? Yeah. Yeah. But the thing is, if I became Superman, I've told you guys this, it would take me maybe 5 seconds flat before I turned into Homelander. I would be so corrupted if I had Superman's powers. And I'm sure in the beginning I would tell myself oh yeah, I'm killing people for the greater good. It just has to be done. But it would not take me long before I just became fully corrupted, okay?
Must be, because it will cease to exist. And so that's really the crux of the argument. Why it should be Catholicism, it's because Catholicism is true. But the point I'm trying to make is for people that say, it's so radical that we would go back.
Wait, what percentage of the country are Catholics? I'm gonna guess. Actually, I have no idea. Hold on. Let's lock in those bets. I'm gonna say, dude, I have no idea. I'm gonna say 10%. Does that sound right? We'll say 10 to 20%. We'll give it a range, okay? 23% are Catholics. Jesus. 48.9% are Protestants. Huh. Okay. And you're gonna force everybody to be Catholic? Like, what's your game plan here? I guess that's another good question. Like, are practicing Catholics? Because I'm technically Catholic, but I wouldn't describe myself as Catholic, you know, like, even though technically I am. Am I Catholic? I mean, I got confirmed. I'm just not a practicing Catholic, but I guess it never leaves you, right? Like, I don't know. I guess technically I'm a Catholic, right?
Backwards. I would say we went backwards with liberalism, as evidenced by the fact that it's not even reproducing itself. And that's a huge problem. With regard to the stuff about the Old Testament, I mean, look, the Catholic Church, Christians today are not in favor of genocide or slavery. You know, if you want to get into that, this is just like new atheism 101. Like, are you an atheist? Are you an atheist or something?
I'm an agnostic, but I wouldn't particularly use these verses in the Bible to say that your religion is false. I use these verses in the Bible to say that your religion's absurd. To say that your religion is false.
I just wanted to ask you that, and then let me finish the last point.
Watch your mouth, Dean.
It's very funny when atheists who have no objective source of morality, it's like, you know, their morality is something like, hey, man, just leave everybody alone. What if I disagree? What if my morality says, well, I want to kill everybody or something? What if the majority of people said our morality says, well, we want to harm and we want to do this and that? An atheist.
Well, I mean, we're not even in a question of morality at this point. It's like, you know, if there's a group that springs up that wants to challenge power through violence, then, you know, you would hope that there would be like an organized group that would, you know, resist that violence and subjugate those, you know, insurrectionists or invaders or whatever.
Has no God that says, well, you know, so
he's claiming like if we didn't have God, then people would just, you know, then society would just deteriorate into like a Mad Max dystopia.
So has the authority to say this is correct. That's a problem. And yeah, they have a problem with blasphemy laws. It is good to have a God that is a source.
I mean, it's also the case that just because you're Christian, just because you're guided by Christian, like George W. Bush was a Christian, okay? He was an evangelical. He was born again Christian. Dick Cheney, to my knowledge, was a Christian. I'll bet you anything, every single major member of George W. Bush's cabinet were Christian. That didn't stop them from violently invading Iraq and Afghanistan.
Of authority that gives us our morality that is unquestionable. With regard to the Old Testament, if you want to get into the debate about, you know, what's bad, I would start with the question of how do you know what's bad?
Hey, Nick, I'm sorry.
You claim that certain things are bad. You don't know where good and bad comes from. And how do we know the good and bad are even real? If we're all material, if we're only atoms and we don't have...
Oh, God, I'm getting triggered. My PTSD is coming back. Oh, God.
Souls, why does it matter what happens to any of us? I mean, what is justice? Is there such a thing as the conceptual? If there is only matter, where is the conceptual? Can we see it? Can we feel it? Is it located somewhere?
I'm way too sober to be listening to this conversation, okay?
Let's let you respond.
Well, and I'm making a point here. I'll wrap it up quickly. So for an atheist to point to the Old Testament and say, well, you know, how could a God who does these things be so immoral? I would say to the godless, what is moral and who are we if we're not just stardust being rearranged? I mean, slavery, these things, these are conceptual.
We are literally stardust being rearranged. It's just, it is what it is.
Only exist with a real philosophical viewpoint, not with this kind of lame, like, Sky Daddy isn't real sort of stuff. So, you know, there's just a lot of assumptions there that kind of need to be interrogated.
Okay, Dean.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what needs to be interrogated is the fact that you asked me, well, what do I do with a group of people like others?
I like my theory. I like my theory of the world, which apparently, now I didn't watch Rick and Morty, but apparently this was a premise of one of the episodes of Rick and Morty. But what if the universe sprung into existence because of a scientific experiment gone bad? Okay. So there's some kind of sentient being and it's doing some research. Maybe it's trying to like build its own black holes, you know, maybe it's trying to like figure out cold fusion, right? Like the source of limitless energy. And then there was just a giant explosion and it never stopped, you know, and then that gave that breathed the universe into existence. And if that's the case, our God is just like this scientist that lived in some other dimension outside of ours or whatever.
What if God said that?
Then
I think that's a question that we need to ask.
Then we would have to do it.
Wait, really?
Like at a certain point with people that make the case that, God is responsible for the physical world and morality and objective reality and knowledge and morality and ethics and blah, blah, blah. What fails from my perspective is that at a certain point, you just have to take it on faith. You can try to justify it through like 1,000 different ways. You could try to do it through like the laws of logic or whatever, like Andrew Wilson. But at the end of the day, the source of your spiritual understanding of the world and physical understanding of the world is a bunch of texts that were written by people 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, before major scientific development, before the Enlightenment period, before crucially important developments in our understanding of the universe that have only occurred in the last like 200 years, during a time when 99.99999% of people were illiterate. There are references to these things in the Bible called floodgates. And there was this theory, for whoever was writing this section of the Bible, I believe this tied into God flooding the earth and Noah with his ark and everything like that. There was this idea that the world was surrounded by water, and the thing that protected the world from the water pouring in were these like floodgates. And God opened up these actual physical floodgates, and that's what caused the major flooding that when Noah built the ark and everything like that. And so that is like, I can't accept that central premise at the center of my like moral system or my understanding of reality. It can't come from a piece of text 3,000 years ago, especially when there's no shortage of other spiritual texts in other regions of the world that came up with other deities and other explanations for why the world came into being. Why is this one out of thousands of religions? Why does this one supposedly have more credibility than endless other religions that have existed throughout human history? It's just, that's not enough for me. I can't take that leap of faith and say, you know what? I choose to believe that Moses literally spoke to a burning bush, and a burning bush told Moses to write down these 10 commandments on these tablets. It was the voice of God himself speaking through this burning bush. Like I just can't do it. And this is what tripped me up when I was young. I would think about these stories. I'm like, this doesn't seem like it's possible. Like, I don't know if it's possible for someone to turn water into wine, like I just don't know if that's possible. It feels very unlikely. But they'll tell you, like, I know God is real because, I have conversations with God. Like God literally speaks to me in my head. It's like, okay, well, what if I tell you like God speaks to me, like, okay, well, I also talk to God and God tells me that I should like kill the firstborn son of everybody I don't like. Well, no, that's wrong. Well, what do you mean? God told me. So I just, whatever. So you're definitely not Catholic based on all this. Catholic isn't like being Jewish. It's not an ethnicity. No, I'm saying I was a confirmed Catholic. So I went through the official process. Like I was baptized, I took the Eucharist, I did confession, and I was confirmed. How many other sacraments are there? Are there 7 sacraments? So then there's marriage, and then there's sacraments of like when you're about to die, a priest comes to talk to you, and then there's one other one. I don't remember. But I'm not a practicing Catholic. Yeah.
Really? If God told you to baby, would you do it?
Jesus.
Well, God would never do that because God is good and those things are evil.
Okay, so is evil. So when he commanded people to kill Malachi in 1 Samuel 15:3, that was evil?
God is telling us to rape and kill babies right now.
So specifically about killing, in 1 Samuel 15:3, he did command Saul and his men to kill the Amalekite babies.
Babies? He told them to rape babies?
No, to kill babies.
Well, yeah, then if I were one of those guys, I would have done it, but not.
Okay, so if God commanded you to kill a baby today, would you do it?
Yes.
Oh my God. What is this conversation?
Okay, so why would you kill a baby, but you wouldn't rape a baby?
Because that would be cruel or something.
Wait, is a baby not cruel?
In the Old Testament, it worked differently.
No, I'm talking
That's
about
a fallen world.
You particularly said that you would kill a baby today if God asked you, but you wouldn't kill a baby if God asked you. So how come you kill a baby today, but not a baby?
I mean, this is kind of like a brilliant argument when you think about it. Like, yes, I would kill a baby if God told me, but I wouldn't rape a baby. It's like, wait, I'm sorry, what? How does that make sense?
Because the context of the Old Testament is that it's a fallen world, and that's the context you're talking about. You said that in the Old Testament,
dude, we're not talking about dude. Please answer my question.
Yeah, we literally are.
Answer.
Well, if we're not talking about wait. If we're not talking about the Old Testament, what are we talking about?
About the fact that you told me today, if God commanded you to kill a baby, you would do it. And then I followed that up by asking you, if God commanded you to baby, would you do it? And you said,
but God
no,
wouldn't do that because
that's
it's evil.
cruel. Okay, so Babel today, you would do if God commanded it, but a baby today, you wouldn't do because God wouldn't command it.
Well, first of all,
are you making the implication that baby today isn't evil?
No. What you said is that in the
so
Old
then you
Testament.
wouldn't do that either, right?
Well, hang on. Let's rewind. Let's rewind because you said in the Bible God says to babies. Can you just retract that?
Kill them. No, he didn't say that.
No, if you rewind, yeah, okay. People can rewind the clip. You said babies because you got to.
No, he was doing a thought experiment. I mean, it is kind of a brilliant thought experiment when you think about it. I kind of respect it. All right, it's almost time to do the hippy dippy pod, guys. So that's what we're gonna do. It feels like a good spot to end that.